Greetings and peace, everybody. This evening, I would like to start this conversation with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful. We are honored and privileged to have our beloved brother and friend, Sheikh Wahid Azal of the Fatimiyya Sufi order, who is joining us for part 5 of the series of conversations that we're having to be able to discuss the truth and talk about truth where no one else is discussing such topics. And in this current discussion, we will talk about the different agents of chaos and cultists of the Dugin background because of what they're doing with the anti-vax movement, what's been going on in America since 2016 up until now. There are still many incidents taking place of this craziness that's been there to divide the people. So we are privileged and honored to have our beloved friend and Sheikh join us for the part 5 of these conversations. So with that, I give my greeting of Assalamu alaikum and Nur alaikum to Sheikh Wahid Azal for this discussion tonight.
Wa alaikum Nur. Thank you for having me back. The honor, as usual, is always mine. This is an important topic. I think, though, that we should probably start here and say that the situation has very much shifted and changed from where it may have been in 2016 and 2017, when I was very active against the Duginists online. And I think they have lost an enormous amount of credibility over the last couple of years, especially, I would say, the nail that really was hammered into their coffin came in the form of the January 6th insurrection in Washington, D.C., because what these people represent is really leading to precisely an event like that, a fascist push. Now, I'm no fan of the American government, and I'm definitely no fan of the US Congress, Democrat or Republican. This is an imperial government, and it is owned, like I've said before, by forces beyond itself, the plutocracy and the corporatocracy of the Anglo-American Empire. Nevertheless, a fascist push of the kind that Mr. Trump and his followers were attempting on January 6th in the United States is not something that the world can live with comfortably, especially if a force like that happens to take power unimpeded. It has at its disposal, the nuclear codes and the American military at its disposal that could wreak unbelievable havoc beyond anything that we've seen so far on this planet as a whole. Instead, I believe that the American empire should be allowed to weaken organically, which it is. And eventually, ultimately, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control of his creation. So, those of us who are activists also need to be a little bit patient with this process because the Lord of the universe does what it wills ultimately. And these forces like Aleksandr Dugin and those that are behind him have really showed their hand in the last couple of years. And alhamdulillah, we are now in a position where I can say that even though they appear to be biding their time, they are not going to be able to fool people as easily as they did back in 2015 and 16. Now, instead of me giving a history and kind of a chronology of Dugin itself, I would direct people to the interview that I did with Newsbud back in April 2017, where I basically go over some of the very basic elements of Dugin's biography, what he represents, etc. Newsbud itself has also lost a lot of credibility. Those people basically took the Trump crowd and became basically the one of the many portals of the Russian alt media ecology on the internet, catering to that Trump crowd online. Sybil Edmonds, who was the editor-in-chief and the leading mouthpiece of that thing, very soon was confronted, I think around the end of 2017, with what that actually meant when her and a lot of her guests were attacked very viciously on Twitter and also all over the internet, because she began to realize that these forces are not exactly what they claim, and that this organization is playing all sides. And Newsbud had, and it still does, I don't know whether they're still doing stuff, they have a very overtly Erdogan bias. And, Sybil Edmonds herself has been rumored for a long time to be a kind of working on behalf of the Turkish government. I don't have any of these sorts of connections, and I'm generally hesitant to get involved with any of these kind of portals online that have either connections to the government of Iran or Turkey or Russia or even the West. I've been offered interviews by some of the local media here, and I've turned them all down, precisely because some of them have connections to Rupert Murdoch's news corporation or even the ABC, etc. Nevertheless, let us start here and go back to before, before the election of 2016. I would start in 2010. For myself, I started watching the network Russia Today in 2010, and I was absolutely enthralled by this network. At the time, I would say from 2010 to 2014, what we saw with Russia Today was a news corporation and an editorial line that was explicitly left-wing.
Yes.
That kind of projected an image of itself as being a sort of a USSR Mark II that was rising in Russia at the time. And some of the friendships that I subsequently made on Facebook came from that era. People like Eric Draitser, who I consider one of the best pundits of world events and political economy and geopolitics out there. His analysis has always been spot on. Eric's is overtly and quite openly a Marxist, but he is very good at what he does. Also, my friend Sukhan Chandan and many other people like that. And at the time, these people were being groomed, in portals such as Russia Today, RT, and also the Iranian Press TV. Their commentaries were fantastic. But then all of a sudden, I would say from roughly around the end of 2013, when all this disturbance in Ukraine began, when both the Americans and Russia got involved to basically tear that entire country apart, which they did, both of them, the editorial line and the general perspective of Russia Today and the Russian alt media ecology online as a whole began to shift rightward and hasn't stopped. And today, one can say without any hesitation that Russia Today and the alt media ecology is indistinguishable in its editorial line from Murdoch's, whether we're talking about Fox News or Sky. In fact, I would say that Russia Today and the alt media ecology controlled by the Russians is even more right-wing than Rupert Murdoch and Sky in that whole setting. They started pushing, anti-immigration, lines of the most jingo. They started pushing, just the stuff that was, one would think in the modern world would have been relegated to the closets or the graveyards of history, was all of a sudden revived by these people. And this has kept going and going and going. And then when one stops and observes this process, one begins to realize that what is going on is a strategy that actually far-righters, and particularly the Nazis back in the 1920s and 30s, used very effectively, and that is browning the red. So what that means is that, they adopt a left-wing line and they attract a lot of left-wing oriented people to their circle. And then they have them. And once they have them, they flip these people to the far-right narratives. Hitler and the National Socialist Party did this extremely effectively in the 20s and the early 30s. It's one of the strategies that they used, that they managed to take power and defeat their communist enemies on the streets of Germany. And this strategy appears since, I would say, 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, to have been the strategy that RT and all of the Russian alt media ecology has adopted very successfully. You couple that with what they did beginning in around 2013 with all of the anti-imperialist, anti-war portals and groups and whatnot in Facebook and Twitter, etc., where you had a sudden stampede of these sorts of people coming there and basically marginalizing all legitimate anti-war, anti-imperialist folks. Myself, Eric Draitser, Sukhan Chandan, and many other people like them. And then taking certain people out of that crowd and corrupting them over a period of time and making them fascists, literally, mouthpieces for a extremely racist, extremely aggressive, extremely fascist agenda, extremely authoritarian. And Iran's press TV has been also playing along with this quite successfully. During 2016, initially, the editorial line of press TV was anti-Trump, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the year, you see the editorial line of press TV become overtly pro-Trump, and they start to invite, some very hairy people to their show, people that I would not be caught in the same room with without packing something. The likes of David Duke and that entire crowd of neo-Nazis and white supremacists and white nationalists, and et cetera. And at that point, I basically cut my losses with press TV as well, because up until that point, they were regularly inviting me as a guest commentator for their news programs. And that was that. But then, people like myself, Eric, Sukan, et cetera, we began to be increasingly marginalized out of that circle. Sukan, especially after an interview that he did, he was one of the guests on Peter Lavelle's Crosstalk program, where Peter Lavelle had invited this extremely dubious woman, Catherine Shakdan, who claimed at the time to be a Shiite Muslim French convert. But we found information on her online that she was also connected to this Western military, NATO-connected think tank, that it was based out of Canada. Yet she was a spokesperson, one of the Muslim spokesperson for the Front National, the party of Marine Le Pen, very pro-Russian. She was then invited to Iran, where she participated in one of the talks of the supreme leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Later, she had a falling out with that entire Shia Muslim French crowd and the supporters of Hezbollah, and then took the veil off. I mean, all this extremely weird people with weird connections, playing one line, but then when you research their backgrounds, you find that they are directly connected to certain, extremely troubling organizations based out of the West.
Yeah.
So my perspective on Dugin today is somewhat, I kind of insinuated some of this in the article I published with Counterpunch in early 2016. This was an article entitled Dugin's Occult Fascism and the Hijacking of Left Anti-Imperialism and Muslim Anti-Salafism. I insinuated that in this article that things do not appear as they seem, because there are certain very interesting parallels in the activities of Aleksandr Dugin and his networks online that kind of resonate with the sort of stuff that both my friend Gioda Preparata wrote in his book Conjuring Hitler, as well as Anthony Sutton in his book, very well-researched book, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, where both of these authors have proven, to my satisfaction, and especially Anthony Sutton, that the rise of Hitler and the rise of fascism on the continent in the 1920s and 1930s had a direct involvement of financial groups and banks and individuals connected both to the city of London and also to Wall Street. And with Dugin and with the Russian, skullduggery online, a very similar, trajectory is going on. And we saw this very directly in 2016, before the election of Donald Trump, in the UK itself, with the Brexit movement and the fallout that came from that. Now, if people recall, there was a scandal that broke out almost a year after all of this, and this was the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where an organization owned and operated by the Mercer family was responsible for basically using Facebook to rally a large percentage of the British electorate to basically vote against their best interests in this Brexit vote. We later found out that most of this campaign was being run by people who have direct connections to the city of London itself, people like Nigel Farage, who at the time was the UKIP member that was sitting in the European Parliament, and on these examples go. All of these people, in one way or another, have direct connections to this Russian alt media ecology. The Mercer family itself is well known to have all kinds of business partnerships and associations with a whole medley of Russian oligarchs. They operate out of Russia itself. I don't have any evidence of any direct connections of the Mercer family with Aleksandr Dugin itself, but there's rumored that they have business interests and business relationships with Konstantin Malofeev, who is the direct oligarch that pulls Dugin's strings and financed his Tsargrad TV, etc. So from this perspective, we begin to glean that this whole story about the opposition between the United States and Russia is just a smokescreen. This is just basically a socially, in my opinion, a socially engineered attempt of creating anxiety in people believing a conflict to be real when it's not. Because when you have such large percentage of American investors and these plutocrats like the Mercer family having direct relationships with Russian oligarchs, who then themselves have direct connections to the Kremlin, what is going on? What is this conflict about? My conclusion is that the Russian state and the Putinist state is actually a Anglo-American corporate satellite. That this is not a independent entity that is, trying to curb the power of the United States and whatnot. So essentially, what some of these forces, like the Mercer family, did in 2016 was to basically contract their attempt to change the political landscape in the United States by contracting out to the Russians. Now, I don't believe in the official Russiagate narrative because I think that the special counsel and its conclusion, even the material that appears to be sealed, wasn't really looking at the right place. I don't believe, for example, that you had Russians sitting in cubicles in St. Petersburg or the Moscow hacking into the election of the United States, because the evidence of the actual hacking and the gerrymandering that was happening on the part of the right, some of the worst, fascist elements within the Republican Party is everywhere. These people controlled multiple state legislatures where they were voter suppressing on a massive scale. And also, a lot of the organizations and contractors associated with the interests of the Republican Party and the Trump campaign were on the ground in the United States itself. Yet the special counsel and that that investigation in Russiagate completely didn't even look at any of this stuff. I tried to contact the special counsel myself in 2017, trying to tell them, you need to look here, you need to look here. You're looking at the wrong places. It's not coming out of Russia. It's within the United States itself. But as we know, with the way that these elites and these plutocrats behave and the way that they pull the strings of government, that was never the intention. The US media networks made a financial killing and a profit. All of these networks, whether we're talking about CNN, Fox, or the mainstream ones, ABC, NBC, CBS, etc., they made money in the ratings during this whole thing. So essentially, all sides lied to the American people about what had actually occurred. And what had actually occurred, I heard this very early in 2016 from an individual whose opinion I trust, an Iranian scholar who's presently living in the United States. And he said to me that from his analysis and what he was hearing on the ground, this is the time when the primaries were still going on within the Republican Party, that there were interests within the United States and abroad that wanted to bring a Trump presidency into the United States. Number one, so that a Trump presidency would further deregulate the American economy, so that it would allow cover for some of these big plutocrats for the beginning stages of a massive capital flight out of the United States, right? Without anyone being alerted as to what was going on. And all of this obviously happened, whether through the GOP-dominated Congress at the time, or whether through the departments that DeVos controlled, these massive casino deregulations of the U.S. economy that was happening, which on the face of it was contrary to the rhetoric that Donald Trump was espousing on the campaign trail, on the hustings during most of the campaign of 2016, where he was preaching a very populist rhetoric, and on this goes. But there were interests in the United States and abroad that wanted to see Trump come to power. And so what they may have done is to contract the media angle of that election for that year to the Russians. And the Russians played their part. Basically, Russia Today became a propaganda bullhorn for the Trump campaign, as did Press TV itself after probably around May of 2016. People like, what's his name? George, what's his name? I forget his last name right now. He used to be a member of parliament, suddenly changed their line.
George Galloway?
George Galloway, from one day being anti-Trump, whether we're talking about Press TV or Russia Today, to the next day, basically playing violent swan songs, promoting Donald Trump as the savior from the wars in MENA, etc. I mean, these people have lost every ounce of credibility they once possessed. They have proven themselves to be nothing more than excuse my French, prostitutes themselves. As much as they have accused, their mainstream media counterparts in the mainstream press who are, but they themselves are, because a true journalist does not change their line as radically as these people did for the buck, because these people are getting paid and they have platforms because they have been marginalized by the mainstream press. They found their platforms with these Russians and also Press TV, who is effectively, in my opinion, being controlled by a Russian media line, because the line of Press TV is indistinguishable many times from that of Russia Today. And on these examples go. All of this is a strategy that was first effected, in theory, by none other than Aleksandr Dugin. These are precisely the kind of strategies that the Duginists have pursued consistently, particularly from about 2015 to the election of Donald Trump, up until I would say about 2018, 2019, which was their height. They have since begun to decline, because a lot of the people who used to follow these people are now basically had the wool taken from their eyes, realizing that they were playing with fire.
Yes.
And that what we were dealing with Aleksandr Dugin and all of these various networks are fascist. Now, I should mention this. I myself, from around 2013 to the beginning of 2015, actually very briefly fell under the spell, at least, on some level, of what Dugin was espousing. And I should explain myself, what I mean. At the time, Aleksandr Dugin and the people around him were espousing an extremely interesting, rhetoric that is very appealing to someone like myself, because they were espousing the left, but they were simultaneously talking the language of esoteric spirituality. Dugin was promoting Henry Corbin, who is one of my heroes. He was incessantly talking about René Guénon and Julius Evola, etc. And to someone of my temperament, right, at the time, from 2013 to about 2015, Aleksandr Dugin was packaging himself as a sort of Russian Orthodox version of Ali Shariati, who is one of my ultimate heroes. But once I went into their circles, and particularly one list of theirs called the New Resistance, and you see the people that are involved, they are all coming from neo-Nazi backgrounds. The person who actually ran that list at the time is a former leader of the American Front, a organization that has been blacklisted by the Southern Poverty Law Center as a violent neo-Nazi organization. This person had stints in prison, etc. And then it was also rumored that this person had become an FBI informant, which usually what happens in a lot of these far-right extremist groups, the FBI or whatever law enforcement agency, after they send them first to prison, they basically cut a deal with these people, and then they become informants for the government. And on these examples went. Roya and I at the time befriended a couple who lived in Germany, who I thought was an interesting gentleman, and his girlfriend or wife at the time, this individual by the name of Manuel Oxenreiter. I first saw this guy appear on Russia Today, and this was at a time when Russia Today and its punditry were espousing a very anti-imperialist left-wing line. So we became friends, and we actually invited this couple to our home in Berlin, in Northeast Berlin. And but over time, you know, this relationship began to sour, especially between Roya and the girlfriend. You know, she was an Armenian Syrian, and Roya at the time, justifiably, like any left-wing German, had a problem with the rhetoric that was coming from various places, just constantly pushing Islamophobia into German mainstream. This is at a time when, you know, Germany was only then starting to begin experiencing the surge of a lot of these refugees that were coming from the war in Syria. Now, from 2013 to the end of 2014, when, you know, we were sort of ostensibly friends with this couple, there was another event that was going on in Germany as a result of the disclosures of Edward Snowden about the mass surveillance of Germany. So a movement started within Germany called the Monday Afternoon Walk, where people from all cross sections of you know, the German society would basically protest the American mass surveillance of their country. But by the time we start to get to the end of 2014, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this movement changes from being a protest against American mass surveillance of Germany to forming itself in the city of Dresden into PEGIDA. This is the anti-Islamic, very racist, anti-immigration group that formed out of the city of Dresden, which is in East Germany. And Manuel Oxenreiter, his girlfriend, and the entire Duginist organization suddenly, out of nowhere, began to support PEGIDA. And this made absolutely no sense. You know, on the one hand, before that time, they were courting Muslims, especially left-wing Muslims and most Shia Muslims, particularly people who were the supporters of the resistance axis. But once it came to this original mass movement morphing itself into PEGIDA, all of a sudden you have the entire Duginist organization behind these people. Now, in the end of 2014, as PEGIDA itself is just exploding all throughout Germany, in the city of Frankfurt, in one of these PEGIDA rallies, there's a video of this that anybody can look up online, where you have an Israeli basically finding themselves, you know, as you know, getting the bullhorn, the microphone at this rally, and just preaching anti-immigration Islamophobic rubbish at this PEGIDA rally, with all these right-wing Germans cheering this guy on. And this was just unbelievable to me. You all of a sudden are seeing now the Israelis enter the scene, being supported by far-right Germans, people, you know, people with genuinely fascist and neo-Nazi tendencies, cheering on this Israeli non-German in their crowd, who is basically, under the laws of Germany, under the criminal laws of Germany, inciting to hatred, right, which is a crime in that country. And if you were prosecuted by a German court, you could face up to 7 years in prison for something like that. And nobody is saying anything to this guy. The Duginists are supporting this. Then as I begin to dig more, you find that there are all kinds of right-wing settler Zionists that are associated with Aleksandr Dugin himself. So to a lot of these neo-Nazis, he goes out spouting the anti-Semitic line, and also to a lot of the supporters of the resistant axis. But yet you find Aleksandr Dugin and also Putin himself, the entire architecture of the Putin state, have very deep, close ties, both to Israel, but especially to these right-wing settler Zionist organizations who are systematically engaged in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, taking the land and properties of innocent Palestinians away from them. And you have these completely foolish individuals in Lebanon, such as this woman, Osman, I forgot her first name, her last name is Osman, were given platforms by Russia Today and Press TV, completely aligned with these fascists, right? the very same people who are connected to the butchers and the oppressors of the Palestinian people. And you begin to ask yourself, if you have these prominent supporters of Hezbollah and the resistance rubbing shoulders with fascist entities, who themselves are then connected to the very same people responsible for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. What is going on other than the fact that this entire narrative of these people, being Russian, pro-Russian, Eurasianist, anti-imperialist is a bunch of baloney? That this is actually something much more sinister than people realize, that we're basically seeing the very same forces that have always been playing all sides and have the muscle and the financial power to be able to do that, running with these guys. So Dugin, in my opinion, and his entire network of people are nothing more than and nothing less than contractors of the very Atlanticist forces that they are decrying. And the evidence of this, like I mentioned before, is in the intimate connections of the Mercer family and their finances and their financial power with the Russian oligarchs, such as Konstantin Malafeev and many others besides those guys. Steve Bannon is a direct pawn of the Mercer family. In fact, Steve Bannon was directly sent by Rebecca Mercer into the Trump camp very early on in 2016. And Mr. Bannon became then subsequently the chief strategist of the Trump campaign. And in the first 2 years of the Trump presidency, he was within the Trump White House itself. I believe I think he was first the national security advisor for Donald Trump, if I recall. I mean, and on these examples go. But then when you dig more, you begin to see that the sort of things that the Duginists were doing were things that Dugin was actually writing about in the 1990s, particularly in this book of his known as The Foundation of Geopolitics. My friend, Mr. Branko Malic of the Cali Tribune, did several posts and articles about what is in this book, because there's no English translation of this book. And what one finds in this book is extremely troubling. But what is even more troubling is when one realized that you have American and Anglo-American corporate actors themselves who have been turned on by all of this, and who have basically gone out and hired Dugin and his people to implement their ultimate agenda, which is essentially from the period of 2017 to January 20th of this year, appears to be the total deregulation of the American economy to provide cover for these people for capital flight, the further erosion of the political landscape of the United States, and on, it goes, basically undermining of American society from the ground level. The political class in the United States, as we all know, have always been corrupt, whether we're talking about Democrats or Republicans. But the people on the ground, people like yourself, people all throughout the United States, people in the Rust Belt of the United States, who have lost the shirts on their back because of these sorts of policies, yes, because of the neoliberalization of the American economy, because of the capital flight out of the United States, who have lost everything, were being played like fiddles by these people all throughout 2016, believing that Donald Trump was their savior, only to come out the other end of this, realizing that this was basically the Pied Piper of Hamlet and nothing more that was leading them off the cliff. Some of these people have realized their mistake. Many others still haven't realized their mistake, because you see a lot of these people who have now jumped on the COVIDiot tree, the COVIDiots, I call these people, who deny the reality of the COVID pandemic, refuse to get vaccinated, and are pushing, just these ridiculous conspiracy theories about the nature of the COVID vaccine and what have you. So the amount of chaos that has been sown by Mr. Dugin and his networks, who were hired, in my opinion, by these big American plutocrats like the Mercers, is undeniable, because the benefits of these people, the financial and profits that they have made during this time, is beyond calculation. So the question is, what can be done And the only thing I would say that what can be done is that people need to stay strong. People need to turn on their thinking caps. Do not believe everything that you hear or see on the internet as being true. Because something is on the internet does not mean it is true. Use your intuitions, use your analysis. The good Lord of the universe has given you minds, use it. That's why it's there. Do not take your brother or sister's word for everything. Respect your brother or sister, but verify the information for yourself in every situation. And if you do that, I guarantee you we will not find ourselves in a situation yet again, like we found from between the years of 2015, I would say, all the way until early this year, where fascism, neo-Nazism, white supremacy, white nationalism was being, systematically normalized all throughout the internet, and in not just in the alt media, but also to a large extent within the mainstream media itself. We're talking about a movement that since the end of the Second World War had been completely marginalized to the fringe. From 2015 to 2021, all of a sudden this movement becomes an element of the mainstream itself, and this is extremely troubling. And you had the most unlikely people supporting all of this. I will mention this because I think your Masonic brothers need to know about this. An individual who I was friends with for a couple of years and then had a falling out with because of this whole Trump thing, a gentleman, I won't mention his name, but a Mason from New York, all of a sudden from about 2016 became a hardcore Donald Trump supporter, ended up becoming actually one of the top people of his campaign in the state of New York. And this person was responsible for bringing out into the social sphere of the internet, not the internet, but the Facebook, absolutely toxic individuals like Gavin McInnes, the founder of the Proud Boys, right? This individual is Jewish, and he was rubbing shoulders with the likes of Gavin McInnes, Richard Spencer, the founder of the alt-right movement, and et cetera, et cetera. On and on this goes. I think Masons have a duty to deal with people like that amongst their own ranks, because these individuals became the conduits of, all kinds of things that happened during these years of this Trump madness. Now, the years of the Trump madness, in some sense, one can say were business as usual, but in another sense, they were not, because this normalization of fascism and white supremacy and white nationalism that occurred during these years is something that we are still sort of having to deal with. But even though it is biding its time, until the head of the serpent is literally cut off, just like the Red Army marched into Berlin and cut off and shattered the Third Reich, we will still be dealing with this monster, and it's like. With these neo-Nazi and white supremacist movements, you cannot engage these people with kid gloves. These people, in my opinion, are the enemies of humanity. And the only paradigm that they understand is when, just like Hitler in the Third Reich, they are staring down the barrel of a Katyusha, and their city is a mound of rubble. That is the only language these people understand. I would also say the same thing about Islamists like the Taliban or ISIS, etc. So,
of course, I thank you for saying that, because in 2016, Sheikh, 2015, 2016, all of a sudden, all of these people that I was following in the so-called truth and spiritual communities, it's like their switch turned overnight, and all of them just became anti-Islamic all of a sudden. And there was a gentleman here in Philadelphia who's an elder of the community, and I asked him, how come this happened all of a sudden? And he said, hating Islam right now is the popular thing to do.
Yes,
it's making them money. And even in the Masonic fraternity, now I represent myself only when I speak about Freemasonry, is I dealt with a lot of these people who would call you brother, but then they would go online and post anti-immigrant, anti-Islamic stuff, and I gave them hell, and I'm proud that I did. And because of a lot of my activism, I got a lot of them to get their act together, especially with a lot of Grand Lodges enacting social media policies that, you as a Mason should always represent yourself at the highest character, including online in different venues of your life. So I held them accountable of what true Freemasonry teaches. I called out those who needed to be called out, regardless of their title or rank. And I made a difference because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that when you fight for justice, or in the Masonic point of view, the grand architect of the universe, that when you fight for the truth and the fight for the equality of all beings of this earth, then you don't have to fear any kind of danger. You just have to do what you need to do and know that somehow, some way, even there was a huge army of pharaohs coming behind Musa alayhi salam, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made a way for him. So we follow that same trust to do the right thing. And you are absolutely right with these people, with these Duginists who people call Putin's Rasputin, and all of this hatred that they're pushing with these different cultists, even with a lot of the Peterson crowd that I see here in America. They're all like tied in together with their hatred
Yes,
of
they are.
Islam, the West, misogyny towards women, and they're talking about us not respecting our women. So it's just so many debacles that you have to look at, and I'm very grateful for you that you are pointing these things out. I truly am.
Well, they have to be pointed out because a lot of innocent people were preyed upon,
Mm,
like demons preying upon the innocent
yes.
during that time. And an enormous amount of damage was done by Aleksandr Dugin's networks and by himself as well. I mean, one example that I will give you that we actually kind of indicated in one of the last pod is this character, Imran Hossein.
Yes.
This character, in my opinion, is a clown, but he's a clown for hire.
That's right.
And he is a shameless hack, this guy, who espouses what he calls Islamic eschatology, where he cherry picks from various hadith and very dubious interpretation of Quranic passages. And is constantly pushing this eschatological kind of nonsense where he puts Russia as the savior of humanity, and on it goes, forgetting the fact that Russia under Putin and under the influence of Dugin, Mr. Dugin himself, is nothing more than a czarist white Russian regime of the kind that was responsible during the 19th century in one of the biggest genocide against Muslims in history in the Caucasus. After the two wars that Iran lost to the czarists in 1812 and then again in 1824, most of the Caucasus, including much of Georgia and Armenia and Azerbaijan and parts of Tajikistan, etc., fell to the Russians. And immediately after the treaties of Golistan and Turkmenchi, the Russians began socially engineering and committed one of the greatest ethnic cleansings of history, whose history is still being written at the time, because a lot of this information was suppressed. Even the Soviet Union was so embarrassed by what had happened that they suppressed a lot of the history around that. But only now we're beginning to see and learn, the kind of atrocities that were committed by these white Russians during the 19th century against the Muslim community. And then you have this imbecile who calls himself a sheikh sitting there praising, this Orthodox Russian, czarist regime, point two, as the savior of humanity, meanwhile deluding his own followers as to the realities that are going on behind the scenes, where Russia under Putin is just basically a contractor of plutocrats and corrupt mafias and oligarchs and nothing more, and that there is no division ultimately between Russia and the West at all. This is all just, just play acts, theater.
And it makes complete sense, because Sheikh Imran Hussein has like over 200,000 subscribers. He's never been targeted in any way. So, and he has all of this information that's being promoted, that's being put out there. So that's how you know when someone is an agent, when they're doing what they're doing, espousing these views and encompassing the Muslim world. And it's unfortunate right now he's in my home country of Pakistan, encompassing the people of that country into his web and into his lies. And it's those kind of people that get promoted and put out there and they don't get attacked. Someone like yourself, who's been sharing the truth for many, many years, for those who have the eyes to see, and you always get attacked in some way. Your views are suppressed. Your information is suppressed. They don't let people find you anywhere. So that's how you know the difference between reality and a shill. And that's exactly what it is. He's promoting this this end time insanity between Muslims and the Russians. And I'm glad that you are addressing this individual.
I should mention this. The internet and social media specifically is the consummate what Guy Debord, the French Marxist sociologist, called the society of the spectacle.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And people need to be very aware of that what the internet represents is, Wall Street advertising and perception management on steroids. Now, we thought in the 90s when the internet first came out and or at least went viral all over the internet, that it would stop that process. But as of, I would say, the crash of NASDAQ in 1999, when Wall Street just basically then came in and started, gobbling up big chunks of the internet. As of today, all of social media and all of the internet, the official internet and the web, is nothing more, nothing less than controlled information portal.
Yes.
And this is very dangerous because of everybody is now hooked. Everybody's got a phone. You don't have to have a computer or laptop to get online. You buy a phone or have a phone, you can get online, and everybody's hooked on this thing. So my advice again to people is that discrimination of thought, the ability to tell the difference between what is false and what is true, analysis of situations, not buying into the Chinese whispers of social media, is a very important faculty that people need to develop for themselves, because the last decade and a half has proven that the internet and the web is actually far more dangerous
Yes.
Than people assumed.
Mhm.
And I think it is the responsibility of people like ourselves, to put this out there. But where it goes back to the Duginists and what you pointed out about the opportunism of people like Imran Hussein, I experienced the exact same opportunism where Imran Hussein is concerned within my own extended family, because there's a member, an extended member of my family, that was very fast promoted within the Duginist and Russian alt media ecology, as a result of my falling out with these people.
Mhm.
As soon as he found out where his interest lies, that it was in his interest not only to distance himself from me, but also to denounce me publicly, then all of a sudden this guy got promoted. He then became a regular on Peter Lavelle's crosstalk, and now he's a darling of these Russian, alt media people, and also he's constantly being called on press TV to appear, and on it goes. I mean, it was only a couple of days after my interview with Newsbud came out that this individual was just then placed within the editorial team of Newsbud. This is how duplicitous all of this is.
Yes.
I think Sybil Edmonds ultimately regretted her decision, not realizing that she was playing with fire, because she ended up getting burnt very badly by these people. But these people are players. They prey on people's gullibility. They prey on people's, desire for fame and notoriety and work. And this individual in my extended family is a MBA from Cambridge. He's well educated, but because of his association with the Russians and this, Russian media ecology, this guy has completely shot his prospects of a genuine career once all of this falls apart. And these people in Russia are not going to, pick him up and give him work, or, what are these people thinking? Things got so weird and wacky in that 2017, particularly with this individual I just mentioned. This guy was threatening publicly myself and my wife on the Facebook wall of Pepe Escobar, and he's actually, a person of interest to the German federal police in their ongoing investigation to what happened to my wife Roya. And this individual is also, I should mention this, as we've talked about this before, not only part of that whole Russian alt media crowd, he's also a card-carrying member of the Baha'i faith simultaneously. And the Baha'i authorities are not doing anything about this guy either, which then tells you, where these nexuses of interest lie, because in 2016, almost to the last man and woman, the entire Persian and Iranian subculture of Iranian Baha'is all solidly became Trumpists. You know, people within my own extended family, aunts, uncles, etc., were waving, the MAGA symbol, and were just beating their chest for Donald Trump as the savior, thinking that maybe Donald Trump was going to actually, send his the U.S. Army into Iran and liberate Iran from the mullahs. Obviously, that never happened. But yeah, you found all of this amongst these people, and this is how wacky all of this became, where a insignificant minority of individuals within the United States who preach love and brotherhood and kumbaya during an election campaign of 2016 are pulled by these very forces that we're talking about into the camp of Donald Trump and become his supporters, offering their vote, their resources, their money, their time, the amount of families and people whose lives were shattered by all of this. And now on the back of this, with this whole QAnon nonsense,
Yes,
is unbelievable. And Mr. Dugin, as the contractor of these forces that we're talking about, was smack in the middle of all of this. The Baha'is of the United States, and particularly the Iranian Baha'i community, were smack in the middle of all this. There is evidence of this on multiple fronts, because that docs blog that this individual calling themselves Akira Kalashnikov, but who is really this Polish American gentleman who's currently living in Warsaw and is part of the whole Duginist intellectual scene. He mentioned overtly in that blog on me that he went directly to the Baha'i Internet Agency and the Baha'i authorities to get a file on me so that he could then create a docs blog, right? So the nexus of fascists and Baha'is is now established, openly admitted to by themselves and openly, displayed on the other side as well. So, this stuff is bad. This sowing of chaos, playing all sides, confusing people, preying on people like demons. This stuff is not only bad, but it must be confronted. And conscientious people, whatever faith you belong to, whatever movement, whatever belief system, you have a God-given, spirit-given responsibility to confront this stuff wherever it rears its head, because it will eventually come to your doorstep one way or another, as it came to my doorstep through this individual I mentioned, and also because, as the German police investigators believe, whoever was responsible for stalking my late wife and poisoning her was directly connected to the Dugin organization. They targeted us, because of our activism, whether on the internet or on the streets of Berlin, against the AfD and these fascist forces that were beginning to rise in that country, which the Duginists cultivated, which people like Manuel Oxenreiter and his magazine Zu Erst were actively cultivating all throughout Germany, and on it goes. So, Roya is a martyr, she's a shaheed. But the people that targeted us and the people that targeted my wife are part of these very forces. So I have a personal bone to pick with Mr. Aleksandr Dugin. And, he might think that this is all, just a job to him, or whatever political ambitions that he has long-term. But, when you go after people's family, that's something else. And when especially one member of their family then ends up dead without any explanation being offered by, German, local authorities, whether the coroner or otherwise, then, these people have to answer. If not in this life, then definitely in the next one.
yeah, that's right. And it's that individual that you mentioned, and all of these people, Sheikh, that you mentioned, reminds me of a quote from Imam Ali that says that those who sell this life for the next lose either of them. So these people thinking that they're going to have fame and fortune and they're going to have all of this luxury, that's what the shaitan does. Never make a deal with the devil, and be careful what you wish for, because you will pay a price for it. So these people that targeted you, targeted our beloved sister Roya, rest in peace. No one gets away with anything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the 99 names is Al-Basir. And Al-Basir, he watches everything. He watches you. He's always watching you, and he will continue to watch you until it's time for you to be held accountable. And that's what I tell people. Doesn't matter how rich you are, what degrees or titles you have, always keep your heart clean and do right by others, which is the real spiritual wealth that will carry you forward. And these people here in America, there a lot of them are delusional because they're following
Yes.
this Duginist crowd, and Dugin himself espouses the destruction of America. So it just doesn't make sense for these people that this guy is basically asking for the destruction of your homeland, and you're falling into these traps of these different disinformation agendas and these agents of chaos that have infiltrated all races, religions, groups of the world. That it's like a web, like you said, this nexus, it's all tied in together. Who is who? It's they're everywhere. And when you're on this path, you have these gang stalkers and handlers in the guise of friends and lovers and associates that will come and try to bring you down. That's the reality. Even I have faced that. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always gave me the intuition. It's like you said, when you woke up, like something didn't feel right to you. So your Sufi
Mm.
senses, they start tingling like the spider senses for Spider-Man. And it tells him something is not right. That's the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your heart and mind telling you that what I'm telling you, listen to it. And it
Absolutely.
has happened many times, even in 2015, when a lot of nonsense was going on here against Muslims, when they were setting up Muslims in these like fake sting operations. And this one guy was trying to befriend me, and I knew something was not right. And I stayed away, and me staying away is probably the reason I'm speaking to you today.
Roya of beloved memory, a little over a week before her passing, came to me one day and said, "Look, I feel there's something targeting us."
Yes.
So I told her, put 2 canisters of mace in your purse. Don't go into uncrowded streets. If you go in public transportation, sit in the most crowded place. Make sure if you go out with Nuri, you're always with somebody accompanied. We did all of this.
Yeah.
Yet on that final day of her life, when Roya and Nuri went out alone, just doing some basic errands a few blocks away from our house, something got to Roya. And this is basically what the Germans believe now, or somebody.
Hmm.
And if these people are determined to get you, they will get you. But they don't realize that both Roya and I were not the kind of people to be shut up. Even if they had gotten me, Roya would have, basically moved heaven and earth to get to the bottom of what happened.
Yes.
And that is what I am doing for her. Unfortunately, I'm in Germany right now because the German authorities warned me, given the history with the NSU murders in Germany, and because we had a small child, that we were not safe. So that's why I came back to Australia.
Yes.
But I felt what Roya was feeling. She felt, she had this intuition that something was stalking us, somebody or some people were stalking us. And given all of that we had accomplished on our street, because we basically cleaned that street in Schillerstrasse in the north end of Pankow, suburb of Pankow in Berlin, Niederschönhausen. We cleaned up that street of that pestilence of neo-Nazis. First with the story I told that happened in early 2015 with this crazy Nazi drunk was accosting this Turkish woman, 2 generations who's been in Germany, and then various other incidents that happening on our streets on a regular basis. Both Roy and I became the unofficial de facto Antifa of our street. And we cleaned up our street of that pestilence, even though that entire district of the North End in Niederschönhausen, Pankow, during the election of 2017, thanks to the manipulation of Dugin and his networks in Germany itself, fell to the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland.
Yeah.
And it was as a result of this that we befriended Franziska Schreiber, this whistleblower of the AfD, who became a good close friend of both Roy and myself, and realized herself what a danger was lurking for Germany at the time, and even still, given the fact that the history that we have with the Germans and what happened in Germany, reviving these demons as Dugin and his people have in Germany, leads to precisely the same sorts of events that we saw during World War II. It leads straight to the ovens and death camps of Treblinka and Auschwitz, etc. Except this time there seems to be an agenda amongst a certain crowd of these, these big plutocrats to do exactly what they did to the Jews of Europe during the 1930s and 1940s to the Muslims. But that ain't going to fly. Number one, because the Muslim immigrant population to Western Europe is twice, three times the percentage of the number of Jews that were in Europe before World War II. And the Muslim population of Europe, if they are pushed, are not going to sit back passively and allow those powers to kind of do the same sorts of things that happened to the Jews of Europe during World War II. So these people are playing with fire. On the other hand, there are certain forces that believe that is precisely what they want. They want to create a civil war European-wide between Europeans and the Muslim immigrant population, and particularly in Germany itself. They're trying to stoke this. This is already to some degree a fact within France, but this also seems to be an agenda within Germany. Now, in France, after the Charlie Hebdo event, which, as far as I'm concerned, was committed by these NATO, standby groups posing as Islamists.
Yes.
Mr. Imran Hussein goes on his pedestal and is then encouraging a mass exodus of Muslims from France back to their home country. So you're talking about second, third generation Algerians and Moroccans and people from all over the Muslim world who've been there with their families in France for a couple of generations, being dictated to by this imbecile to basically destroy their lives, their careers, their families, their businesses, and go back because the agenda of Mr. Aleksandr Dugin and his white supremacist neo-Nazi plutocratic friends like the Mercer family wishes to ethnically cleanse Europe of these brown Muslims who pose a existential threat to their white Europa. This guy is an Uncle Tom. He is a native informer. What Franz Fanon in his book Brown Skin, White Mask classifies as a traitor.
Yes.
Excuse me. So this is how the extent of all of this.
I agree, Sheikh. Thank you for pointing this out, because I've been basically following these type of people for a while just to see what they're talking about, exactly how you pointed out. And they're pushing this destruction of the world and telling people to move into these villages and get out of the big cities, this very conspiracy mindset. And they're profiting off of people's fears. It's basically fear-based mind control. He's pushing all of this fear. He's pushing all of this Russian nonsense. And he's pushing all of this stuff to basically get Muslims to leave their lives, their careers, and go become farmers in some village or something, waiting for the end of the world. That's not the right way to handle things, which goes to show who this individual is, what he stands for, who's behind him, and why he's continuing to talk the way that he does without any consequences. So thank you for addressing this.
Just let us remember, right? This sort of refugee influx and immigration happens because the home countries of these people has been systematically destroyed by colonialism and massive amounts of resource theft that has happened by the First World. And that is why these people immigrate, and these refugee influxes is happening because people are trying to create stable, prosperous lives for their families. Yet, in recent memory, Russia voted in the Security Council in 2011 for the NATO no-fly zone over Libya, that then gave a carte blanche to the American NATO forces for the destruction of the Libyan state. Russia voted in the UN Security Council for against the Houthis and the people fighting against the Saudi Gulf war blitzkrieg against the people of Yemen. So the question is, despite all their pretensions of being anti-imperialist, etc., where it has counted time and time again, the Russians have actually backed the West and America's agenda. So this is yet another proof that Russia is not what it claims it is, that Russia is basically in the pocket. Putin, these oligarchs, all of them are in the pocket of the Anglo-American plutocrats. And it's as simple as that. Russia is not a independent player on the world stage. Maybe it aspires to be, but as of now and over the last decade, it has been nothing more and nothing less than a plaything, a smokescreen for these very forces that we're talking about. And there is evidence of this for anybody who cares to go and look and see what happened after December 25th, 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed. When the Soviet Union collapsed, you have a massive tidal wave of not just American business interests, but American military interests that just pour into Russia and in the former Soviet Union, getting intel and information on every element of the Russian USSR military capabilities of the time. So the Americans and their European allies, after the fall of the Soviet bloc, had every intimate inch of information about what these Russians at that time were capable of. And no one can tell me that since that time, they have not been able to figure out more of it. America and the West capitalized on this information that they got from their former Soviet enemy, which then means that from 1991 to the rise of Vladimir Putin in 1999, 2000, and even now, that the West and the Americans have held the Russians and the Russian establishment by the short and curlies. Furthermore, most of these oligarchs that emerged in the post-Soviet period emerged from out of elements of the regional communist parties, who then become extremely wealthy on the back of these American corporate and the entrepreneurial interests that pour into the former USSR. So these people they owe, these Western counterparts their wealth, etc. So, who's going to tell me here that, these oligarchs like Konstantin Malofeev, who's the benefactor of Aleksandr Dugin, is actually against the West? He owes his entire fortune to the West, to the Americans, to these Western interests, what have you. And this is yet another piece of the puzzle proving that, Russia is not what it claims it is.
Mm-hmm.
And these examples can be multiplied until the cows come home. Yet you have these self-interested, deluded people online, social media. Some of them are innocent, so I cut them that slack, who were pulled wholesale into the camp of Aleksandr Dugin and these people, beating their chest first for Donald Trump, then for QAnon, now for this whole anti-vax, anti-COVID thing. We are in the middle of a genuine pandemic. This COVID virus is real, and it is mutating at an alarming rate. My personal opinion is that this has a non-human origin, and it's going to take a while before we actually put this thing, this genie back into the bottle. But until we do, we can at least minimize the deaths of our loved ones and people around us by not jumping on this anti-vax bandwagon. None of these people were pushing this anti-vax nonsense. Any of them have any credentials in virology, epidemiology. None of them are trained medical people, even the remotest background in basic science like chemistry, etc. Yet they sit there and pontificate online based on misinformation that is spread out by these Russian alt media trolls, believing that this is all this is an attempt by the New World Order to jab us, etc. I'm not a fan of any government, whether the government here in Australia or the one in the United States or the one in Iran, definitely not the Chinese and the Russians. But the fact is that we are in the middle of a crisis, and it's a crisis that humanity has created out of its self-inflicted.
Yeah.
So the best that we can do is to protect each other, to have that etiquette and courtesy towards our fellow man, to mask up, to vaccinate ourselves. The vaccine is obviously it's not a guarantee against acquiring the COVID, but it is at least a guarantee against, getting seriously ill and dying from it, or, spreading it to others in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Yet these people just keep going and going and going with utter nonsense, and creating a situation where, rather than us coming collectively together to finally put this thing down, these people want this thing to continue. And they don't realize that one of the reasons for the anti-COVID vaccine narrative online is because the Russians and the Chinese are manufacturing their own anti-COVID vaccines. And they see AstraZeneca and they see Pfizer as being their competitors. So they want to discredit the vaccine in the West so that eventually in the global South, they flood the markets in places like Africa and Asia with their own vaccine. Yet
Oh,
none of these
that's
people,
absolutely right. And I
yeah,
encourage everyone. I've gotten both doses of my vaccine. Majority of the people in my family have gotten it.
as have
We're-
I, yeah,
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 including our
yeah,
beloved Sheikh, and
yeah.
we're absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong. So the problem with these people, as Sheikh Wahid Azal is teaching us, is that they continue their chaos in all these different venues. Now that Trump is not there, they're going to continue it with this anti-vax stuff, spreading disinformation. So wherever they see an opening to draw their daggers of poison to divide and destroy people in all of these different venues, they're going to do it. And
Yeah.
please use that common sense and that intuition that Allah has given all of you and do the right thing. It's not always about you. And Islamic law teaches us that whatever country you live in, respect the laws and the customs and what they're trying to tell you for the betterment of all the ummah. Everyone is one ummah. So please, Sheikh, continue.
Yeah, and have that basic courtesy towards your fellow human. If not even for people you don't know, for your
Yes.
own family, for your own children, for your loved ones, if not even for yourself, you know.
Mhm.
The anti-vax gravy train is a train that leads to the very same place that led to the January insurrection in the United States, and before that in Germany in August of 2020. You know, people need to think. People need to, you know, if you don't understand something, don't merely take what the internet says about the subject as the final word.
Mhm.
If you have doubts about something, follow that doubt and skepticism. Don't just, you know, shut your mind off all of a sudden and follow a gravy train that is going to lead you off the cliff. You know, again, you know, we can criticize governments and their strategies, their lockdowns. I mean, the lockdowns here where I have been in Queens, some of them have been extremely draconian.
Yes.
Where, you know, we have had these, you know, rules where you can't go beyond a 4-kilometer radius of your house and you're not allowed to have any guests over. And it has been a tough lockdown. But what the Queensland state government has accomplished is awesome. They are one of the only state governments that I know about anywhere in the West that every time there has been an outbreak of the COVID, within a week or two, they have completely, you know, stymied it and brought the numbers down to zero. So that means that this strategy does work. And this is what a lot of medical experts were saying from the very beginning, that when you know, that you have to go hard, and especially ensure once the vaccine comes out, which is out now, that a huge percentage, a large percentage of your population are vaccinated. But because Mr. Dugin and his networks are you know, the puppets of the you know, the Russian oligarchs and Russian plutocracy wants to flood the market with their own manufactured COVID vaccines, they are spreading these anti-vax narratives to confuse people in the West, especially. And so that eventually then these people can come in with their own, you know, with their own version of the same thing. You know, I am hopeful because I see daily that a lot of people are changing their views. People who, for example, up until maybe a couple of weeks ago, were quite you know, intransigent about, you know, this whole anti-vax narrative regarding the COVID, are beginning to kind of sit back a little bit and think little that this issue is a lot more complicated and a lot more nuanced than they first assumed. That, you know, basically acknowledging the reality of the pandemic and the possibility that the vaccine will at least ameliorate, if not cure, the vaccine, does not necessarily mean that one is then jumping from one you know, spectrum to another. We can still be skeptical of every government that there is. We can still be skeptical of the entire pharmaceutical industry and actually, you know, hate all of them, but without, you know, becoming these completely brain dead anti-vax morons who have no scientific training, no scientific understanding, no medical training, no medical understanding. I am dealing with people in my neighborhood, nurses and doctors who are at the front lines, at least here locally. And I trust what these people, the information that these people give to me, than some someone spreading an anti-vax or anti-COVID vaccine online. These people have no reason to lie. If those of them, this anti-vax crowd want to project dishonesty on the part of these basic nurses and doctors on the ground in local hospitals here in Brisbane, then need to then come up with a plausible narrative of why multiple doctors and multiple nurses throughout the world, not just here, are saying essentially the same thing that we're hearing from these people. So is the entire global medical establishment in on a conspiracy? Where does the conspiracy originate? And how come there has not been any whistleblowers from the ranks of these people?
Yes. That's absolutely right. And because right now with the Delta variant going around, there's somebody that I know from the Pakistan side that's close to the Indian border. And the person was in his 30s. He was healthy. He wasn't eating processed food like we have here in the States. He was living a good active lifestyle. He got the Delta variant and his lungs collapsed within 7 days. So, and his eyes got all puffy because of the way the Delta attacks you. So people have to realize this is not just an American issue. It's a global issue. There's people all over the world that have suffered very much, and people here are acting spoiled. They're acting like spoiled brats. They're still breaking all of these protocols, not listening to the medical advice for the betterment of all society and peoples. And then they wonder why they don't have any peace and why they continue to suffer.
That's it,
And that's the reality. And please, Sheikh, continue to educate us on how we can identify these agents of chaos who exist in all races, religions, and countries, and how we as a collective human ummah can combat them through your own experiences as well.
Education, not taking, hand-me-down information for granted, scrutinizing everything with a fine tooth comb, thinking for yourself. But even beyond that, that's the intellectual level of it. I encourage people to really cultivate their own inner spiritual life. For a very simple reason, is because the deeper that you get into your practice, the more your awareness will grow, the stronger your intuition becomes. Your discernment capabilities become that much more acute. So for example, if every day you're doing your salat, and then on top of that, you're reciting certain dhikr a certain number of times, all the time, doing your visualization exercises, etc., constantly, and cultivating those inner faculties, right? Your ability to discern the true from the false becomes that much finer and that much more acute. So everybody, don't neglect your spiritual practice. This is part of the war. It is an occult war. We are fighting an occult war here. And the weaponry that we have is our prayers, our invocations, and our self-development. This is what is the real threat to these powers that be, because when you have aware, switched on individuals, and more and more and more of them, truly switched on individuals, then we're not going to buy into the nonsense of these people, right? We will be able to see the Pied Piper or the wolf in sheep's clothing like that.
Yes.
Right? And that's what these practices are there for. So if you're Sufis and you have a zikr that has been transmitted to you by a murshid, use it as much as possible. Listen to their instructions on your practice. Don't neglect your practice. Deepen your practice. And don't just do your practice to the prescribed number and just, because you're doing something on a rote basis. No, internalize that practice. Go as deep as you possibly can, in that practice. Let that practice open your doors of perception. Reach out to the spirit, invite it in.
Yes. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I agree that even if you're following the Sufi path, it's a lot more to it than praying 5 times a day or doing 1,000, 2,000 zikrs a day that the Sheikh prescribes you. It's more to it than that. It's basically internally bleaching that evilness and darkness from your hearts. It's interesting. There was a story a Sheikh had shared with me, and when somebody had took the initiation, they had to recite astaghfirullah for I think 10,000 times for a month straight. And he said that is a bleach to remove all of the evil from your heart and to remove your nafs, because you're fighting against nafs, dunya, shaitan, and these different things, trying to elevate yourself to this marifat and this tariqat to become one with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or what the Mason describes as the grand architect. So this is very important that you mentioned that whether you're whatever path that you follow, because Allah is everywhere. Allah is the only reality. And it says in Surah 2, verse 62, that whatever path you follow, as long as you do the right thing, don't do anybody wrong, then on the day of judgment, you shall have no grief. So what the Sheikh is telling you is very important, that please take your spiritual practices seriously and be the light of your communities and the light of the area that you are in, like our beloved Sheikh was and his late wife, Roya, rest in peace. In Germany, they were the light of their street dealing with these agents of chaos, which had a recent scenario at a coffee shop near my home where there was an Irish woman and I was getting coffee. And she said something about my Irish sense tells me that you're in this area for a reason. Because
Mhm.
sometimes we wonder, why am I stuck here? I'm tired of this area. I'm tired of the people. Allah make a way for me to get out of this boring lifestyle that I'm stuck in. But you don't know that just your presence and your spiritual power in that area is keeping evil away from coming into that area. So never doubt yourself or think that you are not serving some kind of purpose. You are serving a purpose, and that's just the way this game works. No matter what path or initiatic journey that you're involved in, whether it's Eastern or Western, it's all relatively collective. And this is what I learned too when I visited a lot of the Sufi shrines in Pakistan, Abdullah Shah Ghazi in Karachi, Imam Bari in Islamabad, Data Darbar in Lahore, all of these different elders and sheikhs that have came and taught us, including many of the Persian sheikhs that are also buried in Pakistan. You just go and pay your respects and you feel their struggle and their heartaches and the type of life that they led. Because when you walk this path, don't believe it's going to be all sunshine and rainbow. You're going to get the agents of chaos. They're going to know who you are and they're going to come and find you and they're going to test you to the maximum of your ability. Even all of our beloved prophets and Sahabas were tested beyond
Mhm.
normal human comprehension. So we have to keep our faith, as our beloved Sheikh is teaching us. And please, any concluding thoughts or anything else that you would like to share with the audience?
What I just wanted to comment to what you just said before. After Roya passed away, I really went out of my way to protect the magical space of our
Yes.
apartment. And I befriended this very sweet Jewish Kabbalist gentleman. And the first time I invited him over to my house, he then later told me, he said, about 2 blocks before I got off the train to come to your flat, I was feeling all of your talismans and all of your prayers. So then once I came in, I was just completely just transfixed by everything that you showed me in this place, because I was feeling it for 2 blocks before I even came to your place. So this means that this stuff works. This is the thing. This is not about me being a special person or anything like that. Is that the deeper that you get into your practice, the more this nur rises, which is one of the reasons why we say nur alaykum wa alaykum nur in the Fatimiyya, for that
Yes.
very reason, is to rise the nur, and the nur becomes its own protection. And those who are sensitive to these powers and these forces will themselves feel it. This gentleman came from a different tradition, although a very deeply connected brother tradition to ours, but he was feeling this stuff
Yeah.
2 blocks before coming into my house. So do this, get deeper into your practice. Your practice is your weapon. This is, in a sense, a jihad. But this jihad doesn't occur on the external world. And this is what these Islamists don't ever understand properly, is that we are waging, first of all, an occult battle within ourselves,
Yes.
and also against the occult forces out there, who are acting as vampires, right?
Yes.
And as far as I'm concerned, I'm a vampire killer, just as my late wife, Roya, was a vampire killer.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's like what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, that when they were coming back from battle, that now that you fought this jihad, there's a jihadul akbar, which is the greatest jihad, which is to conquer yourself and to get over the nafs, dunya, and shaitan, and all of these things that try to keep you down in this nexus. Because we live in this 3D reality, but a lot of our warfare takes place on these other realms too. So we have to do the right thing. Like you said, don't neglect your practices. If you're a Sufi, do your zikrs, do your salats, do whatever the Sheikh is telling you to do. That's only for your betterment. It's not helping anybody else but yourself. because you're increasing your spiritual power. So that's very important that you mentioned that.
And these former these supporters of Hezbollah, coming from these old Hezbollah families who suddenly found themselves in the camp of Dugin, it tells you about the lack of their practice, because if they had any genuine practice as Muslims, they would have been able to see right through these people from day one.
Yes.
And not gravitate into their circle, because what has now ended up happening is that a huge section of organizations like the Muqawama, the Lebanese Hezbollah, and even the Syrian state itself have now effectively transformed themselves into being puppets of the Russians. Puppet states and puppet organizations of Russian interests. This is in no way, shape, or form an endorsement of the West, or I'm not one of those people who's going to jump from one camp into another because I put a pox on both of their houses. And I am saying that we need a third force in this planet to confront both of them, push them both out of the perspective for the welfare of all of us. And so we can actually build a peaceful world and start to rebuild this planet from where they have taken it so far. That's what I'm about.
Yeah, I'm with you all the way. And it's very important, because this is what our prophet, peace be upon him, instructed us, for all humanity to become one ummah under one God. And that's basically the Tawheed and the brotherhood of al-Islam, including there was a Native American prophecy that I recently listened to. And in it, it says that when the time comes, everyone on this earth is going to be of an equal status, and everyone will have an equal opportunity to a life, healthcare, education, food, resources. It's not going to be like the top 1% that holds trillions in wealth, while the bottom 98 are just struggling hand to mouth, trying to survive with these working 2-3 jobs a month. So this is even the Native American philosophies, which I found very connected with Sufistic aspects, with their connections with what they call the Great Spirit, and just being one with all of these different elements. I found that fascinating, that we're all connected in some way, and all of these cultures are kind of teaching you the truth in their own way, which relates to what you said, that no matter what you follow, which even the Holy Quran supports, just do it right and do right by yourself, and Allah will have mercy on you.
Absolutely. And stay consistent on the path, and all will be well. I mean, another thing from the Quran that is extremely important here is what it mentions about humans being Khalifatullah, that the caliph of God upon earth, all humans. And that means that we have a responsibility, which we have been, as a collective, reneging on for a very long time. And now is the time for basically the separation of the wheat of the chaff. Who is going to step up to God's command from the beginning of creation to be the Khalifatullah, to be the Khalifatullah collectively, to take care and to cultivate and to nourish everything that God has created on this planet, the plants, the animals, the minerals, everything, and not be an agent of Iblis, lanatullah alayh.
Yeah.
Because this humanity right now has become a almost a propagandist for the Iblis, for the devil,
Yes.
right? And they're beginning to prove that devil wrong, who refused to bow down to Adam, right? So it is the task of the true believer of whatever tradition that they come from to ensure that doesn't occur, that the devil isn't proven right, vis-a-vis the Lord of the universe.
Yeah, and this is proven. I was reading the book Secret of Secrets by Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahmatullahi alayhi, and he says the same thing, is that you have to, before his soul departed from this earth, all of his sons gathered around him, and there was one thing that he told them that touched me, and he said, never lose your faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Always trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no matter what happens. And it just emboldened me so much when he was about to enter Baghdad, and Al-Khidr appeared and said, you're not ready yet. And the trials and tribulations that he went through in the desert, where Iblis himself, A'udhu Billah, just came and tried to test him with these different mirages when he was hungry and thirsty. And Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani identified this beast and knew how to defeat him in all of the realms of existence. And that's why he's such a revered saint in Sufism.
Nothing further to add. So this is the thing. People need to step up to their Adamic calling as the Caliph of God upon earth. as
Yes.
caretakers of this planet. That is the responsibility we have. And in fact, this is one of the central messages of the ancient religion of Zoroaster, of Zarathustra, Zoroastrianism.
Mm.
That humans who fight on behalf of the Earth Angel Mother and who are the emissaries of Ahura Mazda and his holy immortals, the 6 archangels, must be the caretakers of the plants, the animals, the minerals, and those that seek to destroy this planet, who are forces of the chaos, incidentally, which is what Mr. Dugin identifies himself as, the metaphysician of chaos. They are actually of the forces of the Ahriman, of the Druj,
Yes.
the counter powers of darkness. So this isn't just merely a narrative that is running through the Quran, but this is also a narrative that goes back to my own ancient Zoroastrian ancestors. They were warning about this, and they also said, and you find this in the Zoroastrian scriptures, that there will come a time where the Earth Angel will be under assault from these forces of the counter powers of darkness. And then it will be the task to become, of those who know what is going on, to step up and combat on behalf of the angel of the earth, to become the knights of the angel who is the mother.
Wow, that's absolutely beautiful, Sheikh. And again, thank you so much for joining us for part 5 of the series of conversations that we're having to continue to educate us on topics that no one else will address. And again, you have my permission to distribute and upload this video wherever you wish to ensure our truth and transparency, to get the message out there. And I encourage everyone to support our beloved Sheikh Wahid Azal, and I will continue to put his links in the description below where you can follow his Twitter, academia, blogspot, Facebook, all of those things. So with all of those things, I bid you all a beautiful evening wherever you are, and Nur alaikum to our beloved Sheikh, and wish you all a great, great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.